You're listening to The New Paris. I'm your host, Lindsay Tremuta. Almost a year ago, I launched a series on my newsletter called Leaving America, based on the multitude of reasons Americans opt to leave the country and why many of them, as it happens, end up in Paris. Through this series and through my network of creative women in Paris, I've connected with so many brilliant Americans who have moved, want to move, or at least understand the desire to. And that includes Susanna Schrobsdorff, a former executive editor and columnist for Time magazine who moved to Paris within the last couple of years. Since we've met, we've talked endlessly about the feelings tied up in leaving one's homeland and what Paris has done for us, as it has for so many before us. She joins me today to talk about her path to Paris, why it was the right place to settle at this point in her life, and on building community to withstand the toughest of times. Susanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm so happy to be here.
I have so many questions for you, and I'm not really sure where to begin, but I think, I'm just fresh, a couple weeks off from my, returning from my trip to the U.S., which summoned a lot of feelings, and you and I have talked a lot about the feeling of, what was or what we thought we knew from our homeland and then, living here. I've lived here a lot longer, but you've been coming to France for a very long time. So I guess maybe that was the impetus in wanting to have you on the show for the first episode of the fall. Why are you here? Why are you in Paris? How did you get here? You're a newswoman.
Yep.
A long career in the news media as the executive editor of Time and a former columnist. How did you get here?
Well, I was here at the age of 26. I was the youngest person I think Time magazine sent abroad with all the cushy benefits of an expat, allowance, as they called it back then. And but they sent me to do to upgrade the computers all over Europe and to handle the logistics for all the Olympics that were happening here. And so it was a very different life then, and it was great. And then, except that I didn't speak French and I'd never been to France. And so the culture shock was enormous. I cried for 3 months. As you might imagine, the French did not want to have their stuff digitized. They did not want the new computers. They did not want any of the people who were the core of the Time Bureau. And then it turned out all right. And they were all still my friends. And I stayed friends with them all these years. And I came back every few years to see my friends that lived here. So I maintained ties with France. And I was transferred to Brussels, then back to New York. Then I had all these children. I mean, there were only 2.
But that's a lot. It
felt like a lot. I married a Swede that I met in Paris in the basement of the Catholic Church in the 6th with a bunch of Swedish au pairs and me.
Why were you there?
Taking French, because I didn't speak any French when I got here. In fact, I learned my French watching Bewitched dubbed in French because I knew the plot. And also L'Incroyable Hulk, which is limited conjugations and a simple plot.
Yeah, the Hulk doesn't really.
Yeah, it doesn't really emote. Like there was like it worked well. So I was taking French at night, and he was a Swedish programmer, Vulcan basically, like a Swedish programmer in Paris, and we fell in love, and we got married in the north of Sweden by the Arctic Circle, which is another issue. And all those people that were upset with me for all the digitization came to the wedding, and it was fun. And then they moved me to Brussels for a year and a half. Then they moved me back to New York, and I missed Europe. My family has a long history in Europe. I lived in Berlin when I was a kid.
You're German also,
my dad
right?
is German and Russian, so, but I moved to Brooklyn, which is fabulous. And then I had the thousands of children, two. And I ended up just consulting for Time for a period while I was raising the kids. And then one day I woke up and I said, I have to go back to work. But Time was doing one of its media convulsions in which it was being bought or sold from Time Warner. Or, as we know, this is all that it had begun, the first wave of media insanity. Mm-hmm. And so I knocked on the door of people at Newsweek who I'd met while doing the American presidential political convention logistics, the Democratic and Republican conventions. And I begged the woman who ran the website to hire me. And I begged her every week for 6 months. I said, and she was my age. It was when they let people who were like 40-something onto the web at the time. It was before, when the web, nobody cared. So they just would shuffle people over there. So she hired me And I didn't tell her that my news desk editor title wasn't really editing. I was doing computers. So I came and I had done reporting, a lot of reporting in France, but it was sort of subterranean.
Sure.
She hired me, and then that started it. By the end, I was running the website. And then it, as you may have heard, the internet became a huge thing, even for Newsweek, which had denied it up until that point.
Really?
You know, it was one of those places that had resisted tremendously. I won't name the editor that was in charge then, but he's a famous historian. And he was not even willing to, he didn't really want to even say the word internet. He really prized the print edition.
Mm.
So then I was there for a bit. And then I went to Time magazine when Newsweek was purchased by a billionaire.
Oh, the first of those scenarios,
yes,
right? Well, not the first, but you know, just the cycle of it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I've been bought and sold by billionaires 3 times, so I just want to point that out.
Oh, yeah. So you know what the uproar is about.
Yeah, and then went back to Time, but now as a new person, as a person who was fully a journalist, and so I'm just saying to all of you, you can be 43 and start a whole different kind of career. And I stayed at Time for quite a while, and then I left to do writing full time right after the pandemic. And at that point, I wanted, my kids were heading towards the end of college. And I said, I really want to figure out where to live once they're graduated. And I just wanted to come back. And I thought of this as home always. I thought every time I would come in from the airport in Charles de Gaulle, when I come back, I knew like you'd come in the first time you see the little glimpses of the inner periphery, you go, okay, I'm home. So I wanted to come back.
It's so interesting you say that, because that's kind of the feeling I had when even before I got to the Périph', when the plane literally landed and we're creeping up to the gate and going to get off the plane. That's when I felt lighter.
The respiration settles, huh?
Yeah, and I don't, that's not to say that there aren't stresses. I mean, there was someone who, cut me off, and there are people who are very like moody when you get off the plane and you're like, oh, I'm also home to that. But there was, I guess it's now my familiar, and it feels a little bit more like an emotion I can manage, whereas the unknown, the constant, just like latent anxiety in the U.S. feels unmanageable. And I say this knowing I have a lot of American listeners, so I don't want anyone to feel like, I think we're superior because we live over here. In fact, there's a certain level of self-torment that we put ourselves under in trying to understand the place we come from, but from afar. Do you feel that? Yeah.
I mean, it took a lot for me to get here. And so there's a big difference between people who are like trailing spouses who come here, or people who are sent by their job and they were unclear. I sort of had to fight to get here, sell everything I owned, come here at a risk that they might not renew my visa. Anything could happen. But do you feel a little bit like people think it's a fantasy dream, that nothing, like your life must be perfect, and that the other things that might happen and difficulties of life don't apply, or you don't get a right to complain because you live here?
I think it's mostly that, except that I like to say that, obviously I have family living there. Some of the people I love the most are there. And it affects us here as American citizens, because we pay taxes also to support consular services and all the things that are supposed to function for Americans no matter where they're living. I mean, that began with the military living abroad, that these sort of services and rights were extended. So I understand it's not the same day-to-day, chaos. But if you're like us, and I know that we're not alone, we follow things so closely that it's as though we're there. I think it does help to have a physical distance, but it feels like careening into an abyss.
America looms large, not just for us. My French friends, my European friends feel every shudder. That old saying that if America gets a cold, the rest of the world gets the flu. Because the shudder of the American economy will ripple out. Their decisions on defense would affect
we see
Europe
that now. Yep.
This week. I also think my kids are there. My kids are gay. They're queer kids, and they are anxious. I also think things have changed since you moved out of the U.S. The income disparity between top and bottom is gone. The level of insecurity, where one bad medical bill, one loss of job, the insecurity after the pandemic has left people feeling precarious. And that tension, there's that tension I think that you probably feel. And the prices for food and housing, dramatic. And it did affect my decision to come here, because I could be living in New York as an editor at a salary job or in a corporate job. I could not have lived there as a person who wants to write books and essays. Absolutely not. Because the cost of living in New York City particularly, but also elsewhere, is so tremendously high. I would have had to get some other kind of job certainly with health insurance. And I don't think it would have been possible. I think I would have had the same, my hair was falling out by the third billionaire. really, the level of stress was so high. And I do think that it's palpable.
Right.
It's palpable, because I take 2 kids out for bagels and cappuccinos and maybe one smoothie, and it's $62. I look at my kids, I'm like, how are you guys doing this? And I'm like, Mom, we don't go out.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? You're not wrong that things have changed. No, and that's even before the cultural upheaval.
Yeah. And I feel that, although, it's interesting that we're talking about that disparity. And in France right now, there's the new prime minister, and they're talking about the 2% tax. That's going to be in my newsletter. The 2% tax plan proposed by Gabriel Zucman on the ultra wealthy. So, it pertains to like 1,800 who earn over, or who have a wealth of over 100 million euros. And when you look at it's staggering. If you look at the wealth disparity and how the wealthier have grown wealthier over the last 15 years, it is sixfold.
Yeah.
And so, I think for the most part, a lot of Europe is undergoing the same sort of tension. And if these countries don't want to tax people properly, and they're giving these sort of, free passes to billionaires, where is that going to leave us? The only thing that I feel a little bit more reassured about, and maybe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because you came long before I was ever here, is the propensity toward protest here and like deep revolutionary spirit that could be reignited. Maybe we're almost there.
I think the unions are strong here. You see the difficulties in America to gather up a strong response. I think that the wealth gap is so dramatic in the United States that the money, like it's impossible to imagine. And if you are so precarious that you don't have health care, if you don't have a job, and it is actually harder to protest. You don't have days off.
Right.
You can't be out on a Tuesday. You don't have sick days. So it is interesting to see that if you keep it very, the people who are in the most precarious states have the least bandwidth to show their discontent in the United States. Yep. And so that's one thing that strikes me. And you would think that if what was happening in the United States were happening here, I don't know. I think they would you would see what would happen with the Gilets jaunes, like tenfold. Yeah. So I'm worried about the America, because it's very hard for people to just stop steady, because they don't have most Americans don't even have $500 in a bank for an emergency. That is an absolute fact. So you lose a day of work, you lose a day pay, if you're sick, and in many cases, not everybody, but a lot.
So I'm wondering, because, Paris has been a refuge for so many people for centuries. Like, Americans have been coming to not just to Paris, but if we're speaking just about Paris, for so long. This is not a new trend we're seeing in people at various points of their lives choosing to uproot and settle here. We know, obviously, James Baldwin and all of the musicians who felt ostracized from the States, thinkers. We might now see scientists being welcomed here because they can't do their work and research freely in the United States. So what do you make of Paris in this moment that has its own very real tensions and this desire from foreigners, but specifically Americans, to keep it in their front of mind as a possibility, as a home?
I think based on the number of people that I know who are asking me to send them apartment listings, it's enormous. They think that this is like their getaway, their escape hatch, right? They don't really fully, I think, understand the cultural adaptation that they might have to make. I wonder also what adapting Paris would have to do, because the one thing I noticed is Americans come and they have a lot of money compared to the French here.
Yeah.
So the people who have the money to come here will find their money goes further here, but I'm not saying offensive, but it can be a little rude to come, and you'll see what happens here if Americans start doing what they did in Portugal and start paying high prices for the apartments and buying everything up. And I say this as a person who came here, but I think that could also be a backlash. There could be a backlash to too many Americans moving in. So far, nobody has looked at me. I'm one of two Americans in my building, and the other one has been there for 40 years. So she's grandfathered in, and she was born in Paris, but she's an American citizen still. So I think they do dream of it. One of my friends who visited me immediately bought an apartment here the next year, and she comes like in a pied-à-terre. She doesn't move it, but she thinks of it as in case it gets bad. And her partner is an African American, so she feels particularly nervous about staying there. So, and not just Paris, London, Portugal, Italy. There's the conversation about who can get a European passport is through the roof. If you go on Instagram, you'll see that half the Americans I know are getting ads for those immigration lawyers that will get you a passport. And it's a cottage industry now.
Yeah.
I think that there's a point where the Europeans are going to go, hey.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot about that particular issue of the Americans that have, accelerated gentrification in places like Lisbon, for example, and in a lot of these countries, the average income is far lower than the average income in Paris, and so I feel like we don't yet, or maybe we won't feel it to the same degree in Paris. But there are people struggling, of course. And I didn't move here on a U.S. salary. I mean, I've always, I had to sort of grapple with the fact that I don't earn the same amount as, people my age who have gone a corporate route in America. But I am seeing the people whose money goes quite far here. But for how long? The dollar is declining rapidly.
Since I've been here,
I'm sure that you feel that. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm wondering, what do you think it is about Paris that still holds for people?
I think that I wrote a piece a while back for Time about this, about after Bataclan, after the attacks. And I said the place that it holds in the American imagination, which is, I think that the generations and generations and generations of people who've come for their semester abroad, for their honeymoons, for their to go to school, to go to Beaux-Arts, to do something, it is the place where you go that is non-commercial in their heads. It is the place where you go for art, for food, for the things that are not just the pleasures in life, but the more basic things that are less capitalistic in a way. I mean, sure, some come for shopping. I'm not diminishing, but those aren't necessarily the people I hear wanting to move here.
Right.
The people I hear wanting to move here want to come to live.
Right.
And, the thing they say most often to me, I want to work to live, not live to work, which is not a new thing.
No,
right?
No.
But as hyper-capitalism, extreme capitalism is not just embraced by the people in the administration right now, as Darwinian capitalism is embraced, I think that is particularly appealing about Paris, on top of the fact that this is the dream to come here to be amongst people who read books, who love art, and in a city that spends a lot of time thinking about what's beautiful.
I just had a conversation with a group of French people at lunch last week. And again, it was like a table of people from very different backgrounds, but who managed to have plenty of things to talk about. And one of the things that occurred to me that we ended up discussing was that there's still this potential for intellectual debate. And not saying that everyone feels comfortable in that space, but everyone's thoughts are sort of valid and it can be debated. And no one gets sort of, violent or judgmental over the fact that we're having an intellectual debate. I mean, there's still this very philosophical foundation to dialogue in among French people, I think. And so I was just astounded that when you take a situation like that or a gathering, you compare it to the overt anti-intellectualism in America right now and banning books and keeping people uninformed. It is all the more staggering. But, I wonder, given the, our administration's inability to, and granted, it's not the first, but the inability to tax the billionaires and to actually hold them accountable for what they owe, are we becoming too American here?
Well, I mean, Macron has gotten flack, I believe, about being too pro-business. Who knows what's going to happen next here? I think that there is but I get this strong sense of respect, almost reverence for the working person here. There's kind of a very strong pride, I guess, in the people who, because the restaurant managers, they feel like it's a métier, it's a career, and it can be a thing you do your whole life because you get a decent vacation. A restaurant manager who goes to Polynesia, who's bought a small apartment that he rents out, and he has a life. And
is this a restaurant owner you know?
No, a restaurant manager, not an
manager
owner.
That you know.
Yeah, that I know. And I thought, there's nobody who'd manage a cafe. You wouldn't ever just have, he doesn't want more than that. Lives on the edge of Paris, not down in the chic bits. But there's a certain respect for the work, right? For the working class. And I think, and that's why the unions maybe are still holding on. So maybe there'll be more support here for the taxes for the billionaire. And then anybody coming in will have to face up to that. But I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see whether France can do it. I don't think I think that's over now. Right. I don't think that's going to happen.
And Gabriel Zucman has been interviewed as talking about how the U.S. used to have one of the most progressive tax systems. And so
under Reagan, it was dramatically different.
Yeah. I think the administration doesn't really revere the working class.
And they say they do, but actually everything, all the policies that are in place, that what is revered is the idea that you can become rich. The idea that you can become one of the people
here or in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Oh, right. No, in the U.S. there's still this lack of class consciousness.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that France's way of functioning, where the working class don't feel like they can ever ascend at all. That's not better.
That's the opposite.
That's the opposite. But there needs to be this middle ground, and I think this obsession with becoming wealthy in America is part of what has led to this overwhelming, blinding support for, an administration that doesn't have their interests in mind. But what's interesting is there is deep suspicion for extreme wealth in France. And so that's why there's overwhelming support among the population for these types of taxes. So we're talking about, 1,800 people who are complaining when they're still going to remain wealthier than most of us can ever imagine being.
Sort of back to why I'm here. It's not just because it's beautiful, but it's because of a value system and the micro connections every single day. The level that it's sort of it's built. Everything's built on relationships. The relationship with the person that sells you the fruit and the bread, and less transactional certainly than New York. Right. And maybe because I'm good at that. Maybe I like it here because I like that, maybe because I was a journalist that.
You like talking to people, too.
I like being with people. And that value system of we don't love you. We don't think you're brilliant just because you have money. And in America, money can be, I'm not saying for everybody, certainly not for my friends, is associated with goodness and smartness. And, the qualities placed on people who have money. And the trust placed in them is extraordinary. And here it's a little less. And that's one of the values I sort of, like you said, suspicion, a little bit of suspicious. Yeah. Why do you have all that money? In America, it's like you must be amazing.
Because you've done well for yourself.
Yes.
We don't really care how you got it. But
and I don't think can change that. So I'm here now.
Right.
so that's one of the when you go figure out where you want to be in the world, sometimes this place isn't perfect. There are lots of things, but you have to find the place where the faults, the things that are not right, are things you can live with, and the things that really matter to you align with something like in your little Rubik's Cube of a heart, like they click in, But doesn't it break your heart? I wrote about this a while back. I thought I really ran out of America. I sold my stuff in 6 months. I sold my apartment, gave away everything, wanted a fresh start, walked in here, thought, done with that, don't have to read American news, I'm okay. And I went to see this Bob Dylan movie, and they were playing music from the 60s. And when they were talking about, segregation and all these terrible things, but then the Pete Seeger character was singing This Land Is Your Land, and I started to cry. And I thought, what the heck? I don't love him. I mean, I left. It's sort of like looking at an old boyfriend and going, oh, but I realized that my heart was breaking for something that feels lost now, like feels out of reach. And I do care if they're okay.
Of course we care.
I mean, and I can't quit hoping
that something will, it will, the idea we used to have of the country will redeem it'll return somehow, maybe even better, because we'll have to fix all the things that were wrong or.
But you and I discussed this. I was never a believer in American exceptionalism. My father spent a lot of time taking apart American foreign policy and American pastry in particular, which made him very upset because it was unattractive, could not understand.
But he was German.
He was German and Russian. He grew up in Germany and lived in Canada for a while. So I never thought we were the greatest country in the world. And for the people who did, it was always a little bewildering to me. And you grew up that way. You grew up believing
a little
perhaps,
bit. Yeah.
Or not.
I don't think I ever grew up in a family that overtly raised the flag for everything America did, but also wasn't overtly critical at every turn. And I think that could be because when I was growing up, there was still a sense of decorum between the parties, and the parties were less extreme. And so I think, even if you didn't align with, stuff on the right, and I'm not saying I did, I'm talking about maybe my parents, right?
Yeah.
And the conversations I would overhear, there wasn't the same vitriol. I'm sure there were things happening that I wasn't aware of, but I also think the access to information has really, changed things. And the fact that we're all sort of pundits is a big problem. And so even with that, it wasn't until I came as a student and I started to hear, what French people would say about America in passing or based on a current event, whatever it might have been. But then I was also here when Obama got elected for the first time, and how enthusiastic the French were to see that was possible, because they know that their own country would have never elected a non-white individual. So I think seeing or hearing observations from foreigners on your homeland is like the quick way to having a reality check, and one that we all really should have all along if we're not being taught, like, we've done some good things, we've done plenty of bad things, let's make sure, we're talking about this in equal measure. And because I don't feel like the way we're taught in school is, it's impossible now, but definitely when I was a kid, there were things that were awful. I remember distinctly some teachers being very critical of the move into Iraq when I was in the classroom. But I didn't fully understand. And I wasn't playing on social media. That didn't exist. I had instant messenger. I was chatting with friends, And so I think my worldview was purely shaped by what I allowed myself to see on television and what my parents were telling me. And so I think I'm someone who was more open to unpacking what I thought I knew, because I was never so gung-ho, America, we're the best, but I was also not like, we're the worst. So I was in that middle space that maybe makes it easier. Yeah. But it wasn't until I think I read Notes on a Foreign Country that I really started to put things together. And that coincided with, Trump's first term, and then we move into the pandemic, and it was just, I had so much time to read into all the things that, I maybe never allowed myself to read into.
And does that cause, not stress, but difference when you're speaking with your family at home? Because that happens a little bit with not everybody that I have friends at home. They all kind of just want to come, but not all of, and I think But are there people back home who think you've changed and are now more French or more not quite aligned with America the way you were before?
Oh yeah, I was at a family gathering, but in Europe, and someone invited a guy who had been a CEO of a big corporation, an American guy, and we're talking, and over the course of several days, hearing my thoughts on, why I would never move back and what I value so much here. At some point he said, there's nothing worse than a lapsed American. And I was actually pretty shocked because I think it's more just that I have had to rethink of my identity entirely. And it's not that I'm lapsed. I'm not giving up my passport. However, there were some blatant problems. Why are you so ill-equipped to see it? You're educated, but you're also extremely wealthy. And so it's very easy for you to sort of, for this guy at least, to brush things under the rug. And then within my own family, I think I'm very aligned with my parents, but they definitely sense a greater urgency in my way of talking about these things. And they sense that I get very anxious and I'm likely to spiral. And with my sibling, I think she takes the very privileged, and I've tried to tell her this, a very privileged stance of, well, I just don't get into politics. It's like, well, your whole life is political, so sorry. But I think she's so uncomfortable to even address in her own mind what she knows is really happening. And she's not ready to do that, to face that reality.
There's a little bit of frog in water for people over there, and also the media, depending on if you're in one of the Instagram rabbit holes or blue sky rabbit holes of hysteria, there's that. But there's a whole other world where both sides, the headlines can soothe you into they're slowly sliding down this road as if it were normal. Even I have friends who are quite well-known Washington journalists, right? Some of them semi-retired, some of them still working. And I remember one of them not that long ago said, I mean, the Dems will get the House in the midterms and it'll be fine. Trump, they'll win in a landslide. And I just looked and he goes, you really have faith in the system? And I said, what? And I realized they're institutionalists and they're still, they can't see outside this. And if you look at it from afar, to me, it looks like a little fire on the western horizon.
Exactly.
And I thought, which one of us is right? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But I do think it's very clear from over here when you see the steps that are happening, right? And if you ask the, scholars, Ann Applebaum at the Atlantic or any of the people that sort of have seen this story before, but sometimes when you're in it, you don't see it. And what do? We can't throw up our hands and go, get out now, but because we don't know even if that would help, because you would move here and your money would be there, or your house would be there. There's no advice to give.
No, and the reality is many people won't be able to afford an immigration lawyer. So we're talking about, and so that's where the tension comes between what we're suggesting here and talking about the experience of having left. It's not that we want sympathy. At all. It's more just that I feel for people in this very moment who want to leave. And then there's the real criticism of, no, this is the time you come home and you fight. And so what do you think of that? Because that is just simply not
the guilt. There's a little guilt. Yeah. My kids who fight already, who are worried about the gay and trans community, they live in New York, so they feel a little bit like they're in another country. But if the Democratic Socialist candidate, Namdani, wins, he'll be a very attractive candidate for Trump to do things to. And so they may not be, New York may not be immune. And they're like, well, if we leave, they have European passports. So if they leave, they said, but what about my friends who can't leave?
Yeah.
What about my partner who can't leave? So there's these choices that people have to make. And you realize that the privilege I have, massive, to be here. There's a little guilt. And we sort of talked about this, but that movie Paris Blues, where you have Sidney Poitier in the 60s going, he has Diane Carroll who saying you should come back and fight for civil rights. You're avoiding it. Come home to where your people are and fight. And I think Paul Newman in the same film was like, I'm best doing my art here. I'm staying here because my music is what I want to do here. And so everybody's choice is so individual based on your abilities, based on what you love.
And so do you feel like in choosing to be here, you are able to contribute to this, a sense of community and fighting against what is currently happening?
So in my newsletter, I don't write about politics. I did when I worked at Time. I did edit politics. And originally the newsletter I wrote was going to be about from mental health during the pandemic, like fuck up, that's okay. So this would be the opposite. But I think there is something to say. And what I do say personally to my friends is that, I'm here. If you need help getting here, I'm here to help. And then the other thing is that you're not crazy. If I can say that, that this, that they need to organize their communities, that having a network. Glenys McNichol, the author, and I just finished a writing workshop. And what was interesting, these women were from all around the world. And the one thing, we have a WhatsApp group set up. And the one thing we said is that if something goes crazy in the world, because people are talking like that, we feel grateful to know all of you in all these other countries so that we can connect. So I feel will be happening is a localizing of community connections. And then maybe we connect with communities in America to offer support in whatever way we can, whether it's like I've got to move some money in euros and we put it back and help the people back home if something happens, because I don't think we can rely on the institutional, the original institutional systems. I don't even know if I can rely on my Social Security when that time comes. Like, I don't know. So there is this feeling that we need to strengthen the bonds that we have, even if it's across the ocean.
So it's a bridge, like creating this bridge, and not just between the U.S. and France, but between other countries as well.
You can run, but you cannot hide from America. America will, we feel it.
Right.
We feel it, and I feel it. Cab drivers, waiters will know as much about American politics as any American I know. They'll go, oh, Trump has decided to withdraw people from the NATO border up by Poland. And I'm not even sure if half of America would know that. And I mean, obviously, it's quite an interest here. But
right. The threat is far closer and more palpable, perhaps.
Yeah. So we're here, but it's a global world. It's an interconnected world. And I think you and I, for us, our challenge is, can we disengage? Because if we live here and we're immersed in the day-to-day news of there
and here
and we're not doing the very French thing of reading and looking at art and being immersed in the stuff of life,
right?
I feel like we might be missing the point or like a bit of the thing. That's my challenge. I mean, I don't want to place that on you.
It's my challenge too.
It's my challenge right now is to, like, if you're here, don't get so sucked into the tunnel yet. I mean, of American news, as dire and as compelling as it is.
And literally, you don't have to go very far to figure out what the news of the day was over there. Like, it's all being reported here. So it's not like you're, by disengaging or at least creating more boundaries. Let's say that you're turning your head, you're turning your nose at your homeland. But it's true. It's I like to think of the activists who during various social movements in the U.S. Specifically have talked about the need for rest and the need for, picking the moments when you're, diving in with all of your energy into something that's going on, because you literally cannot keep up with every single thing. And so what kind of fighter, creator, writer, thinker, whatever are you going to be if you are depleted? And so I try to think of that, and that feels also kind of French at heart.
Yeah. We'll read a philosopher about something similar that was happening 200 years ago,
right,
and see where that takes you.
Right.
And I was going to ask you for advice about this since you've been here longer. I I think I need to volunteer to help some things in my neighborhood or be in touch with real life and the things that are really going on here. I know that there's a food kitchen up by the Gare de l'Est, and I think we have to stay connected to the communities we have right here, because as the global thing gets more fraught, we have to turn to what's right next to you, what's right in front of you.
Absolutely.
And we know the homeless problem
is huge.
Huge. It's huge in New York. When you go to New York and when you come back, the one we share that in every major city that I have been to in the last year.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
Well, I think you answered your own question. I think the food kitchens, there are public baths also where there are volunteers who help guide people to use the facilities and to use lockers. And I know some people who do that. And it's because he felt, one person in particular who has a corporate job, and he's French American, and felt like all the time he was wasting on social media could be used differently.
Exactly.
And so he started volunteering.
Yeah.
And whether it's that or something related to books, there are ways. And Paris is particularly good for this, I think, because people are so quick to resist in the ways that they can. And often that means coming together around a shared mission.
A couple of weeks ago, I saw a group dressed all in red and black and posing and singing, and they were raising money for the blocking protests that happened.
Oh,
but they were carrying a big red flag, and only the French could make their protest raising money attractively dressed, stunningly orchestrated with choreography and a song. And I went, I will give you money. That is excellent. What you have done here is excellent. Should I be a part of this? I can't sing, but it feels incredibly, it's very moving somehow.
Well, yeah, their way of coming together, it's like, they're like, my individual life is not all that matters, right?
Do you find that? I think that that's true. The collective, and maybe it's that piece of paper I signed for my visa that I had to pay attention to the fraternité part of the collective,
Well, I think that, and then I'm also, in the same breath going to say that their inability to or disregard for certain COVID rules and other people's health, not so collective. But I do think at least more so.
Yeah.
And there's the desire to want to think for the group, because ultimately, what do we have if we don't have that?
They're kind of in your business too. If you walk around
Always.
and the belt on your coat is trailing, somebody will tell you. If you drop €10, they will come and pick it up. They will talk to you. There's a sense of weirdly involved in, like, you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't be sitting down in the flip down metro seat at this point. Somebody will tell you.
Oh, you'll get shamed and then maybe start a fight with someone.
I feel like
who
it's
is
like a small, like, I was like, instead of just ignoring it, they're like, this is not what you're supposed to do. And I laugh because it's sort of almost like a village where there would be people like, no, we don't do that.
Yeah, what do we call that? Like neighborhood watch?
It's
like neighborhood watch on the public transit.
I'm getting that way too. There was somebody who left their trash by the canal Saint Martin. They went, I wanted to chase that. Excuse me. Yeah. Hello. And I was like, oh God.
Yeah, but this is what we need to do,
Yeah.
I guess in closing, as someone who has somewhat recently moved but has deep connections that last, from decades ago, and you have now this writing workshop called The Blue Hour with Glynis, what do you want Paris to be and to continue to be for you, for not only for you, but for people who are in the process maybe of thinking about how they can make a move? And maybe it won't be Paris, but it will be France. But what do you want people, or what do you want the country to do and be?
I would like it to stay. I would like the neighborhoods that are still true neighborhoods to remain neighborhoody and not become, like parts of the Marais, become entirely outward, transient focused. Like people that are coming through, there's a vast difference between going to a restaurant where they know they'll never see you again, most of their customers, and going in where there's some core people and there's some visitors. Because the feeling of being in these neighborhoods where the bakery people know your name and the it is extraordinary, this feeling of community. And I hope that they keep that, because if you need anything, a plumber or anything, I just walk out the door and ask somebody and they will tell me. And I think I cherish it. And
it gets you through the everyday.
Yeah, it gets me through the everyday. And I don't feel alone with any of my problems. So I hope they keep that and it doesn't become anonymous or Darwinian the way it might in some parts of New York.
And I lied. I have another question. My closing question would be then, what do you want people to keep in mind, people listening, sort of now their homework? If France's homework is to, preserve this neighborhood spirit.
I think, and it's a little bit what you said when we spoke, which is do your research on real Paris, do your research, read The New Paris, read that book, read Lindsay's book. There's another book by the former bureau chief of the New York Times called La Séduction, The Seduction.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's about the secret currency of Paris, which is not seducing everybody for sex, but how to get around and move within the city. What is the rationale behind the way relationships develop? And I mean relationships, even the most casual, like your pharmacy. Mm-hmm. Turns out you have to have a relationship with your pharmacist. So do the research, because if you come here expecting it to operate the way you normally operate and just plunk down here and enjoy the croissant, you might be frustrated. But if you do your research and you still want to come, or come and rent for 6 months and see.
Yeah, the trial is a good idea.
6 months renting, it's you'll have to pay the money up front. There's some things you have to do, or do Airbnb for 3 months. But with the 3-month visa, you can stay up to 3 months, because it's not a fairy tale. It's amazing. It's amazing, but it's not a fairy tale.
I don't think there's anything more to add to that. It is not a fairy tale, but it is amazing. Susanna, thank you. We're so lucky you're here.
Thank you.
And for people who are interested in your workshop, you will be running it again in the new year?
In April.
So It's called The Blue Hour, and I will link to that in the show notes. And I hope you'll come back for other discussions.
Thanks, Lindsay.
That's the show for today. If you're listening on Spotify, be sure to check out the poll related to this episode by scrolling down in your app. There are more exciting conversations to come this season, so I hope you'll subscribe or share the show with a friend if you've been enjoying what you've heard so far. As always, you can find more from me at lindsaytremuta.com and at the New Paris Dispatch on Substack. À très bientôt.